So as you can see here, the inside of the rear of the motor here is really grimy from years of leaks, and this needs to be cleaned up before we can really work on the bike. And a little trick that I have to offer you is a way to help keep all this junk from getting inside the motor when you're cleaning. The new rear main seal that we supply is of a newer style than the original that you'll probably be taking out of there. And it comes with this plastic sleeve to help it hold its shape and transport and so on. This is a great tool to use to block off the motor. You could, I guess, take some duct tape and seal it off, but don't have to spend a lot of time with this. I just put this in a plastic bag and kind of fold the plastic up around the side. And now that's sealed, and now I can take this sleeve and just push it inside like that, and then I'll just put a piece of tape on there to kind of hold it in place. And now that's pretty well sealed off, good enough for cleaning. It could be then removed when we're done, and we don't get any junk inside the motor. All right, so a little while later, a little bit of elbow grease and some solvent, we've got the rear end pretty well cleaned up. This thing did its job perfectly. And now we're going to need to remove the rear main seal and install the new one. So there's actually a factory BMW tool for this job. This bridge is bolted on to the rear of the engine block, and then there's this hook tool that slides in this hole and basically hooks around this inside of the seal, and then you tighten the screw and pulls the seal out. Pretty cool. Same tool is then used for putting in the new rear main seal, and that's this screw here, goes into the tool, and then there's an adapter, and then the seal driver, and then this is also then bolted onto the rear of the motor, and you turn the screw and it pushes it in, pushes the rear main seal in. Chances are you don't have these. We happen to, but there's another way. So using some other standard tools, we can achieve the same thing. So to remove the rear main seal, you can use just a standard seal puller. These are kind of available everywhere. And then you're going to go in here and carefully hook inside the seal. Now, you don't want to pry against the crankshaft because that will defeat the purpose of having tied in the crank. It'll move it forward, could cause you all kinds of problems. You want to pry on something else. So I put a piece of steel bar in here, pry against that. Boom, and out it comes. So now we got a good look at this thrust washer that we talked about earlier. There's one just like it on the other side. It's held in place on these two pins right here, and it's important that it remains in place. This shows a little bit of wear, but it's perfectly acceptable. So now you want to clean this area up really well. Okay, and here's the new seal. It's different than the one that came out, very likely. This is the newer version. They work very well. They need to be installed dry. That means no oil on the outside, no oil on the inside, just dry. So you can get that kind of started. Okay, so this is the tool that can also be used to install the rear main seal. This is something you have to make yourself. At this point in time, we don't offer it. It's basically, if you have a lathe, you can make one easily enough, or if you go to a machine shop, they can probably make one of these for you really quick. You'll need just to take a piece of steel and machine it down to the diameter of the seal, which I think is 110 millimeters, and then transfer the holes from the flywheel and drill through. Basically, real simple. Then you lay this onto the seal, and you actually only really need 3 holes, but we went and did all 5. And then putting these, using the flywheel, the original flywheel bolts, like so. Now we're going to sequentially tighten the 3 bolts and draw the seal into the housing. Once you get to the end, the seal has a positive stop on the case, so you can feel it tighten up. You don't want to over tighten it. Now just simply remove the tool and your main seal is installed. If you've got a buddy with a machine shop, a tool like this could probably be created for you for about a 12-pack. Hopefully. And there we have it. The seal is installed. Double check that the thrust washer is still secure on the pins. And now we're going to have a look at the oil pump cover. This is the old style with the Phillips screws. This should be replaced actually with the newer version that uses hex bolts, but we'll take it apart and have a look. Okay, to remove the oil pump cover, these are Phillips screws. They're usually pretty tight. Impact driver is a great way to just break them free. Put that in there, give it a little, there we go. So that was pretty easy. Now we'll remove these screws. So now that we've got those out, we can pop the oil pump cover off. There we go. We're going to be replacing this O-ring. While you've got the pump cover off, it's a good time to have a look at the oil pump and see how it's doing. Just make sure it goes back in the same way it comes out. So it works well for pulling the oil pump out as a snap ring plier, something that puts pressure towards the outside. You just hook it in like so, and carefully remove the pump, just like that. Have a look. We're looking for excessive scoring, not so bad. And most importantly, on these older ones, the oil pump drive gear is held in place with a Woodruff key, as you can see right there. And a lot of times these get loose, and if that were to shear, that would be pretty catastrophic for the motor. But this one seems okay. It's nice and tight, so we can just go ahead and put that right back on again. Later models of the camshaft have a flat on the end, and instead of a Woodruff key, and those are much more reliable. But when you have an old bike like this, always have a look. In general, always have a look at the oil pump while you're in there. It doesn't hurt. Okay, so I'm just looking at this oil pump cover, and it's got a little bit of wear, but it's perfectly serviceable. We need to take this O-ring out. We'll replace that. It is recommended that you replace this with the newer style. If we were doing an engine overhaul, and which we'll get to on this bike, when we do the engine overhaul, we'll most definitely put the newer version on there. But I think this is, for what we're doing here, perfectly serviceable, and we're just going to put a new O-ring in there and put it back together. It'll work just fine. Okay, I've got the oil pump cover cleaned up and a new O-ring. Notice there's a chamfer that goes up. Make sure this is clean one more time. Always just tighten loosely at first and then come back in a crossways pattern. And then on this type of screwdriver, I can slide a wrench on there to get a little extra torque. There we go. We should be good to go. Okay, so now we've got the rear main seal installed, the oil pump O-ring. Now we can put the flywheel back on and assemble the clutch. It starts going back together again. So I went ahead and cleaned the flywheel in the solvent tank. I just always like to put everything back together as clean as possible. Okay, now I haven't disturbed the position of the crankshaft, so now I'm going to install the flywheel and make sure that the OT mark lines up in the window, just like the way I took it apart. One thing to note on later models, there's an O-ring inside here that you need to replace. This is an older bike, it doesn't have that O-ring yet, but from about 75, 76 on, there's an O-ring inside there. Replace that when you have it apart. Okay, so now we're going to put the new flywheel bolts in. These are stretch bolts, and they should always be replaced whenever they're removed for any reason. Okay, now I've got all the bolts in and just hand tight. And before I actually torque them down, I'm just going to one last time make sure that the crankshaft turns. Make sure that I didn't drop that thrust bearing despite my best efforts. But it turns fine, so we're good to go. We're going to be ready to torque this down. So go back to the flywheel holding tool. Depending on what model year bike you have, there's different torque specs. So always check your torque specs in your manual. In this case, 65 Newton meters is what I'm going to torque them to. First, I'm just going to snug them down a little bit in a cross pattern. Should be good. Now just remove the flywheel holding tool and stay tuned for the next episode where we will install the clutch and reinstall the gearbox.